YouTube, as much as it has faults, it's still my favorite website. It has changed so much in just how we communicate. That's what these videos are. They're fiction to teach how history happens, how people move, how nations are built, how ideas are spread. And that's the main point of my channel.
The irrelevance of history is probably the greatest asset of it, because the irrelevance and the differences are what's interesting, what's fascinating, and actually what develops your mind on all this.
I feel incredibly lucky because I can have this as a career. So if somebody doesn't get history or anything in my field, I don't hold that against them at all. If you lived in Chris Chan's position, would you have turned out like him? Would you have made
Anyway, moving on to our next questions.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, welcome to the Create Unknown, the home of Make Something Mean Something. It is TCU night, TCU's Days, Tuesdays here, live on Discord, 6 p.m. Eastern with all of our patrons, some lurkers, some normies, some people just kind of like creeping around in the background. And with me, as always, is Matthew Tabor.
Yeah, and we have a Valentine's date tonight, don't we?
That's right.
We all have a sort of Valentine's date. And it's really important to start a Valentine's Day date off with an intro. If you don't write an intro for your Valentine's date, it's not going to go anywhere, okay? There's an old Russian saying that increasingly took on relevance throughout the 20th century as Stalin and then thousands of Soviet apparatchiks continuously rewove the fabric of the past to suit the fashions of the present. The joke was that the future is quite certain. It's the past that keeps changing. It's hard enough to give compelling accounts of what was, and our guest today is the best at giving compelling accounts of what if. And in doing so, he's become the second most beloved hub in the 13 to 45 demographic. Congratulations to Alternate History Hub on hitting 2 million subscribers, and also achieving 300 million views just the other day. That's about 10 times the number who died in Mao's Great Leap Forward, and he got there by asking what would have happened had Germany won World War I, looking at the trajectory of France, the United Kingdom, all of Europe, had the career of an artillery officer we know as Napoleon topped out at controlling a single cannon battery instead of an entire continent. What if every U.S. state was its own country? What's the world like without a war on drugs, without 9/11 being any more than a mundane day in September? And the hub sometimes enters the realm of fiction, like positing the consequences of Superman being evil. It's fun when it's fun, and it's fun when it's serious. But it's important to recognize that Alternate History Hub is a strangely Homeric poet. His channel is a very modern take on the traditional blend of having a masterful command of facts and language and the creativity to make a story about it pop. The result is a largely responsible counterfactual history that manages to be both entertaining and plausible. In a niche saturated by Wikipedia rehashers and smug personalities who trot from topic to topic unencumbered by any real knowledge, Alternate History Hub does it right. That's why only he can tell us about a past and future that, for better and worse, we'll never have. What if YouTube never existed at all?
Well, thank you guys for having me on here. That was the best intro I could probably imagine. If I had wrote that for myself, everyone would just say, "Oh, this guy, don't listen to him. He's giving himself too much credit." I think you guys gave me too much credit. I feel like I'm now weaving the multiverse. I am Doctor Strange in the multiverse of madness now, and not just a guy that talks about history on YouTube. But thank you so much for having me on here. It is a very good Valentine's Day date. I brought some wine and some candy for myself. Maybe you'll get it in the mail in like 2 weeks. But hopefully when it gets there.
It's saying I brought some wine and candy. Isn't that like how 60% of To Catch a Predator interviews go?
Oh, I have a story about that. Let's talk.
What? You shouldn't have a story about that.
I'm curious now. I have a story about To Catch a Predator. Yes, let's go right into that. Let's find that out.
All right. We'll get to Cody and his lovely channel later. First, let me tell you about the time where I was like almost abducted in Boston.
There you go.
What?
Yeah, when I was an intern in Boston for a summer. I was 20 years old, So I wasn't like a child. I wasn't a child. I was an adult. I was walking home from the grocery store, and this older gentleman just was literally following me, would not leave me alone, and begging me to come back to his apartment to drink wine with him.
What about the candy?
Yeah. There was no candy. I wasn't offered candy.
Well, there usually isn't
ever
candy. It's usually just a thing.
I don't know if there would be wine either. Like, probably not. But, I did decline the offer, but it was frightening because it was the kind of thing where I was like, am I going to have to fight this guy? Like, he wouldn't leave me alone. I thought he was going to follow me back to my house. Mm-hmm. And it was frightening. So I sympathize with anybody who's been like stalked by scary strangers before, because that happened to me.
Were you squaring them up? Were you thinking if this guy, like, were you looking at the weapons around you, anything in the store, like could I use?
He was an unassuming older man, so it was like, Kino in the chat posted the guy from Family Guy with the whistle. What's his name?
Herbert.
Herbert. Yeah. It was kind of Herbert-y, and it was like, if I fought this guy, then I would definitely be the one who looked like I was just assaulting like a senior on the sidewalk. It would be a bad look.
That's a great mental image in my head now. Now you're just beating Herbert the person. He's like, oh, Kevin, please don't do it. I'm just like, teach you.
Yeah.
Giving me wine.
I know.
Pound him in the streets.
Well, no. we know what the world is like without Kevin having been abducted and probably assaulted in some fashion. What is the world like if we never had YouTube?
That is a great segue.
What would be different?
I mean, definitely all of our lives would be different. I tell you that. I think, is this a genuine question or is this just a segue?
That's a genuine question.
That's a genuine question. I think
it's real. Yeah.
YouTube, as much as it has faults and it's has problems and stuff like that, it's still my favorite website in the world. Like, I think it has changed so much in just how we view media and even communicate, in terms of the people that we make connections with on just making videos. And it wasn't until a few years ago that now we start having stuff like TikTok and smaller other video sites. But for a good 16 years now, YouTube is kind of just the only site that really has this video sharing, other than the most mainstream one. I mean, there's still stuff like LiveLeak and stuff like that, but I mean, you're putting me on the spot thinking about if YouTube didn't exist. If YouTube didn't exist, it would probably just be the way that the internet had been pre-YouTube, which was just a bunch of smaller video sharing sites. And you would kind of need a relatively big server space to have all of that information, all of that video information on a single site. And it'd be kind of curious if that didn't exist. I mean, some other company, that's probably the most boring answer. Some other company would probably make their own YouTube, which would be kind of dystopian. An Amazon YouTube. Oof. Think about that.
Was it viable at all? Was there any way it was viable to make videos on the internet for a living? Like non-pornographic videos. That's been viable online for a long time. But like something like Alternate History Hub.
Yeah.
Is there anything, where Vsauce too, is there anything that existed? Because I can't remember where you could have gone at that time to have a sustainable income.
It probably would have existed just as individual websites. Like, I think Red Letter Media did that even before YouTube was really like their main source of income. And that's why you would always have an early YouTube. You would have the end of the video say like redlettermedia.com, smosh.com. I think Smosh predated YouTube by like 5 or 6 years. And that's kind of what it would be. It would be a bunch of different video service sites. And the way that you would make money, it wouldn't be nearly as easy or as, collective as it is now. It would kind of have to be your own independent company. But yeah, it would mostly just be, hey, this is my website. Go check out my website and hopefully maybe, buy some merchandise or I collect ad space from like my individual website. But other than that, it would be nothing like it is today. It would be so much of a higher level of getting into. You'd probably need much more of a production value, and you can kind of see that in how early YouTube sort of was. I mean, think of like Channel Awesome, groups of people that kind of came together and almost formed just smaller companies. When today, just a single person with their phone can have millions of views. And we've gone a long way. But yes, I think if YouTube didn't exist, it would you'd kind of have that media still in the hands of the corporations, not really in the hands of individualistic people that can kind of have their own voices. It'd be a lot more boring. Putting me on the spot. Sorry.
Well, speak. I know. It's just, I can imagine like Real Player embeds on websites. It's amazing how websites are just kind of, not that they're not a thing anymore, but they're kind of not a thing anymore because of how dominant.
Not on their own.
They really
not
are
really.
not.
It's like people don't, College Humor was another one I thought of when you were talking about Smosh and stuff.
Yeah.
Like College Humor really was a juggernaut at sending people to their website and selling their ads against their videos, and they had a huge staff and all these people. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about, and I'm glad that you mentioned how boring and dumb things would have been, is TV, because this is one of my favorite topics, especially with creators who do kind of EDU content, because I think EDU television, I know it's objectively horrible. And you made a whole video about Spike TV's alternate history show.
Oh, I did. Yes.
And that video was it hit so many sweet spots for me for so many reasons, because it was like not Bizarro World version of your YouTube channel, but like Normie World, like NPC world of your like very unique and full of bursting with personality and insight YouTube channel. It's like, what if this was extremely bland and cranked out like a horrible like content factory by people who don't have too much of a creative bone in their body? So I would love if you could tell people who haven't seen your video about Spike TV's alternate history show, about that, how bad it was.
Yeah.
And just as like an overarching theme of this question is, what do you think about why TV is so terrible?
Thank you for mentioning that video. I've actually written that video off kind of as a failure. You're probably one of the 10 people that actually watched it, because it got it got rated mature. And it got blocked, so you have to be 18 plus to even watch it. But yes, for the audience
luckily I'm 87, so I was able to watch it.
that's when you get the super mature stuff. Once you hit that 90, that's when YouTube gets the full possibilities are unlocked.
That's right.
But for probably the 99% of people, of even my own audience who haven't seen that video, essentially what happened is Spike TV, a channel which was known for the most intellectual and educational content in the 2000s. In its heyday in 2011, it had a pilot episode for a series called Alternate History. Like, that was it. It's just alternate history, the most boring name you could possibly call it. And I even make a joke in the video that's like having a show on Animal Planet and you just call it Animal. But basically what they did is they did the try and true classic alternate history topic, which is just what if the Nazis won World War II? That's the bread and butter. Man in the High Castle did it. Wolfenstein. That's kind of like the first thought in your mind is, the Nazis winning World War II. Can we talk? What exactly can I talk about, just so this podcast doesn't get like flagged or anything like that? Is there like a type
anything? We don't care, and we'll talk about flagging and demonetization later. But let's just go full bore on
Okay.
Nazi talk or whatever you want to see.
Okay, I'm not gonna, okay. So it was a strangely heavy episode. I mean, because of course we're talking about Nazis winning and stuff, but it was also just incredibly stupid. Just the way that they filmed everything. It was like if Ancient Aliens tried to talk about a serious topic, which Ancient Aliens has tried to do many times and fell flat on their face doing. But this was like if the Ancient Aliens people created a show about alternate history. And they had little fascinating recreations. They had so basically, to set the scene, it the show begins in an alternate like 2011 where a president is being sworn in. But because it's alternate history and, you know, the Nazis won World War II, it's not actually the president. It's the next Fuhrer. The Fuhrer is getting sworn in. And he, you know, he does the whole Sieg Heil and stuff like that. And then the flag unfurls. And, you know, because the Nazis took over, there's a swastika where the stars and stripes should be.
Very edgy.
Very edgy. And, you know, he's saying some bad, you know, gamer stuff. And in the crowd, in the crowd, there are Secret Service guys with iPads. And it sounds fake me describing it, but basically they have their iPads, and the show's saying that Nazis will use 21st century technology to be oppressive. And the way that they illustrate this is by showing a guy looking at an iPad and a Star of David shows up on the screen of this Google Maps thing. And it's like, it's a Jew tracker. And then they go and they just beat up this guy. And I'm like, oh, that's the type of show this is. And it's blatant. It's just it's fucked up, and it's like in a kind of comedic sort of way, and just how little they thought of it. You know, they thought this is our pilot episode for a series about alternate history, and they went about it with the grace of a rhino tripping downstairs. But it continues.
It's hard to do, though.
Oh, it is. It's hard to do.
Like you've got to have a really in-depth knowledge, and this was one of the points in the intro, and it's something that it really is what makes your channel stand out, is that so many of the attempts to do content like you do, to do a show like the Spike TV show, is really surface level knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, it'll be somebody with really the extent of like a Wikipedia summary, then playing with a very complex idea. And that's probably what happened with this show, is that the people doing it, they didn't start with any real depth. And so when they thought, okay, what could this look like in 2011 or whenever it was, let's have an iPad that's a Jew tracker.
Yeah.
You can't do better than that when you don't have a really deep knowledge of it. And people in the episode chat are talking about old shows, things like Adam Ruins Everything, and you know, some of the shows that play with ideas like that. And one of the themes seems to be that the people writing and vetting are not coming from a very knowledgeable place. And as a result, the content is just very weak.
I think the best word to describe this is misconceptions. And I'm glad you talked about Adam Ruins Everything, because that's the same exact way to describe it, is misconceptions. They talk about it as if it's what they, you know, it's as if they're experts on it, when in actuality it's just the common knowledge that everyone just kind of didn't kind of just collectively agreed on and never actually did any research on. For example, like this alternate history show, they said that the Nazis nuke New York. And that's always a common idea, is that the Nazis and Germans were only like a month or a year away from inventing the nuclear bomb and winning the war and stuff like that. They weren't. Like, they weren't at all. Their own ideas about physics and everything like that pretty much came back and bit them in the ass. And it was the reason why all of their scientists ended up fleeing to the United States, because the Nazis believed that atomic science was Jewish science. So they were never going to get the bomb. But this show said, oh no, they were not only going to get the bomb, they were going to invent jet planes. And they were going to use jet planes to win D-Day. So there's recreations and stuff, you know, in 2011 TV budget CGI of 1940s jet planes just taking out Allied troops on D-Day. And somehow that allows the Germans to win the war. And that's kind of, you know, there's no Soviets. There's no Soviet Union at all involved in this scenario. It's purely America. It's purely the British. And if they lose in D-Day, you know, that's it. We go home, everybody. Germans won. We can't do anything. And
so they only read a portion of the Wikipedia article. They didn't even get through the whole thing.
Oh yeah, they skimmed it. They did the little Spark Notes version, and then their computer exploded. And they're kind of like, it was like a second screen Spark Notes. They were like watching Netflix or something while doing it.
The summary that no, it's a summary that you get when you don't pay for the full subscription to SparkNotes, and it's like it cuts off after 2 paragraphs.
They say that's good enough. I'm not paying for the rest of this.
We can get a pilot out of this.
They learned their history from History Channel at like 2 a.m. and they got it like in between this was, Hitler did this. They would have done that. And then they went and watched Spike TV. It's Spike TV. You're not gonna get the most craziest education. But yeah, this whole, just to put it in that picture, this whole episode was just kind of that. It was the most general misconceptions you have about World War II at all. And then they just put that into this whole scenario. So it's the United States has just been completely conquered by Germany, and now it's the modern day, and everyone's racist. That's essentially all it is. And the funniest thing that they had was they used it to talk about surveillance and internet technology. And it was unique because since this was in 2011, there were 2 different things going on: the rise of social media and the Arab Spring. And this thing was produced in like the span of probably 4 to 5 months. And it was oddly optimistic about the Arab Spring. It used it as a basis for saying that the American people would, they'd rise up and they'd defeat the Nazis and stuff like that. And then at the end, they got Tiananmen Squared. But it was still, they used the Arab Spring, which was going along in 2011 before that descended into the Syrian civil war and stuff like that, as sort of this guiding light. Like, look how social media brings on revolutions. And then that brings me to my other point, social media. They did the worst possible thing you can do in alternate history, and it's just simply transplant imagery that we're familiar with, but mix it up. So Facebook still existed in this show. They called it Fash Page. Google.
Okay.
Oh man.
Which maybe that's fitting, but Google was renamed Goebbels, which they didn't even try. They didn't even try.
On.
Oh yeah, it was real bad. Wikipedia was just called Nazi Almanac. That's it. They didn't even, they gave up there. They just said, "Oh yeah, it's Nazi Almanac."
There's no pun. There's no Wikipedia slash.
There was no pun. Google had Goebbels, and then there's Fash Page, and then Nazi Almanac. I don't know. Maybe it was too late at night, and they were just bored. They were like, this isn't. Nobody's gonna see this anyway. Just
nobody cares.
Yeah, nobody cares.
This is one of the one of the benefits of.
Yeah, continue. I'm sorry.
One of the benefits of being part of the live show here is that I've just pasted an episode chat that fashpage.com is available.
Oh.
So the people who are listening, they're going to hear this a week from now or 5 days from now, whatever it is. It's going to be too late. Fashpage will be taken. You'll have missed the boat. And if you'd been an episode chat, you could be registering that at GoDaddy right now.
It's true. Facebook, once they fail this whole meta thing, maybe they'll even go back on it, and they'll pay you a few $1 million to use that domain. Who knows? Zuckerberg. But yeah, this to wrap this whole thing up, it was a very, very horrible first pilot episode, and of course it was so bad the series was never made again. They never had another episode, and they had a few ideas even in the intro. They had like questions, like what if questions flying at the viewer, like it was in Star Wars. And it was like, what if the meteor didn't kill the dinosaurs? What if the South won the Civil War? Which that would have been another interesting episode, let me tell you that. But yeah, it was just sort of stuff like that. And no, it was so bad, they never made another episode. And the only reason I remember it is because I was in high school and I watched it live, and they never aired it again. And so I almost thought, like, a few years later, did this show exist? And I didn't know it. I wasn't thinking so vaguely. And I was able to find a 480p rip, like going through Google, and it was on like the 8th search result. And there was just a pilot episode unstreamable and I had to download it. But yeah, this thing was gone from all the records. It was almost lost media. And I'm just glad that I was able to make a video about this horrible show and forever preserve it in history, because Spike TV itself is even gone now, but their legacy lives on.
Yeah.
I think we had another.
I loved that video because of that reason, but I just wanted to say real quickly that most pilots never make it to air. The fact that they even threw that up and were like, we'll see if anybody watches this thing is kind of remarkable, that they even aired it once, because I don't recall what the stat is, but it's like an overwhelming amount of TV pilots just get canned. They get made, everybody watches it, they're like, this sucks, they just throw it away, which, obviously should have done. But part of me actually wishes that they had made some more of those episodes just for the entertainment value.
The lulls.
The lulls, like just having you pick them apart would be entertainment gold.
It would have been, and it would have been the Ancient Aliens of history. I mean, Ancient Aliens is already the Ancient Aliens of history, but it'd be more so just in the things that get wrong. And yeah, that would have been a great content like 10 years later.
One of the crazy things to me is that when you think about predictions for the future, like some of the videos made in the 60s and the 70s, Kevin, you've used some of those in old episodes of Mind Blow things many, many years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And you see the predictions of what's going to happen 30, 40, 50 years down the line, what life is going to be like. Well, they're wildly inaccurate. And that's all coming from like things being a continuation of how they are. So when it shows, we're in flying cars with hollow, 3D projection images as, chatting and stuff like that, that's under the assumption that, the balance of power in the world is the same and the US is in a good place and all that. So if those are wrong all the time, and they are, what makes anybody think that they can do something generations down the line when everything is different? Like when all the conditions are different, how can the predictions, how can you feel good about their accuracy?
I am so glad you asked that, because that's always the conundrum with this channel. And so what I kind of do is, the point of my channel isn't really about the true predicting. It's not me saying this is what's actually going to happen, because you're right. One small change just completely brings everything in a different direction. And it often leads to me, staring at my computer screen for hours, just thinking of, okay, well, this thing would get changed and then this thing would get changed, and it balloons. And that's why my videos take so long to get out. But even after doing that for hours, oftentimes I kind of just am left with the most generic baseline things. Sort of broad cultural stuff that was already happening, no matter who was in charge, and just by the nature of how humans work. So usually when I theorize stuff, I use a bunch of different examples from throughout history and try to at least apply that to the situation. And I'm trying to think of an idea that I've done that for. I would say probably my geography videos are probably the best example of it. So say you have a situation where I had a video where Antarctica was green. Antarctica was never had ice. Don't think about it in terms of science. No science or anything like that. But Antarctica is just a green continent, just like everywhere else. And humans can inhabit it and stuff like that. Well, it's like, okay, then what happens? Well, I look at Polynesian history. I look at colonization of the British and the Spanish and the voyages of Captain Cook and stuff like that. And you kind of use a hodgepodge of a bunch of different historical facts which really have nothing to do with each other, and you use them as a basis for this essentially fictional world, because that's what these videos are. They're fiction to teach how history happens, how people move, how nations are built, how ideas are spread. And that's the main point of my channel. Isn't really the, if if World War II had gone this way, then this would have been 100% what would have happened. Instead, it's about making you think, oh, I didn't know that about World War II. Oh, I didn't know, this was what happened during the American Revolution. I didn't know that this is how Polynesians, spread out and how they would have probably colonized Antarctica. And it's, it's something that's about inviting a conversation. It's never about a definitive, I'm right, someone else is wrong. It's at the end of the day just a theory for fun, because alternate history is just it's actually not even it's a fiction. It's a part of science fiction. And what I'm kind of doing is I'm using it in a completely wrong way, and I'm creating almost essentially fictional worlds to talk about nonfiction. It's a very and it makes writing a video incredibly convoluted and not straightforward, but that's usually my thought process with these videos. It's not so there's little moments that's like, oh, this is cool, I didn't know that, and I kind of just wanted that for my videos when talking about a scenario. But yeah, that was a great question.
Put down your can of Hyper Hydro Monster and your Crimson Berry White Claw. It's time to rethink the beverages in your life. We drink a tremendous amount of tea, working on videos, recording the podcast, but we don't drink normie NPC tea. We drink cultured and refined anime tea from the Dragon's Treasure. They've got a gunpowder green tea called Space Cowboy. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know why Kevin likes it. And I used to chew gunpowder green tea leaves when I played baseball in the 90s. I love the stuff. Dragonwell Z, Samurai Chai Plu, black teas, herbals. The Dragon's Treasure describes itself as a haven for anime and tea lovers for a reason. They've even got a tea called Uwu. It's got apple bits and cocoa nibs. It's crazy. I bought the 60 tea sampler pack as soon as I could. I wanted to try everything. It's that good. And when you order from the Dragon's Treasure using the code CREATE, you'll get 10% off your order. That's 10% off using the code CREATE at thedragonstreasure.com. The link's in the description. Look, find me another place that sells Russian caravan tea with a name like, "And then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked." You can't. Thedragonstreasure.com, 10% off when you enter the code CREATE at checkout. The link's in the description below. Get brewing, Space Cowboys.
Watching your videos, I'm reminded of something actually personal to me, because I've heard a comment a few times now about people, or from people on Vsauce 2, essentially saying that, they never liked math, or, whatever the subject is, but these videos make them like it. There's something about the way that it's presented, makes them, like a subject, an academic discipline that they otherwise found very boring. Or for instance, I was speaking with a person from a very like a multi-million-dollar company that does education stuff, and this woman I was speaking with was a former teacher, and she was actually saying that when she was a teacher, her students would always ask her, "Why do we need to know this? Why do I need to know the quadratic formula? Why do I need to know permutations?" And she said she never had a good answer. And she liked that in some of the videos that I was doing on Vsauce 2, they would tie in some sort of mathematical concept with a real world concept and give you some sort of context as to why it's helpful to know something like factorials.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about your channel in history, because I had a moment in college where, I was taking some intro history class. I didn't like it. I found it very boring. I didn't understand the use of it. And the professor even asked the class at one point, like, do we need to learn history? And I stood up and said no. And I had some, smug, I think I'm smarter than I am, 18-year-old answer as to why there was no need to learn history, because you could just, I don't know, be a hermit on a mountain, and it bears no influence on your survival. However, what I really needed was a better history professor to teach me as to why and what history is for. and how it allows you to understand more about yourself and the people around you and your culture and other cultures and how they developed. It's an endless, like, rich discipline to learn about human beings, yet it's treated as this checklist of like rote memorization of fact.
Right, the names and dates level of
I
history.
hate that. I hate that. It's like history is a story of ourselves. It's not, memorize what date this war started.
It really is. I mean, that's kind of any educational thing. It's if teachers can open your eyes on any possible, like you, and it really, most people don't have that opportunity where it's like, it just clicks with them. They don't have a teacher that speaks about it in a right way or in a way that connects with their students. And, I don't blame you for thinking that at that time, history was not important. History's stupid. And it's because most of the time, especially in the public education system, history is usually just talking about who won this battle, because history in the public space really is a lot of just talking about wars. It's just talking about specific dates, who did what on this time. And it's stuff that really has no basis in, especially for a public educational kid. They're not going to think like, oh, this pertains to me. You need a good teacher and somebody that can essentially tell a good story, because that's kind of all, history is just stories. It's stories that we tell to kind of understand where we came from. Why are we like this? And that's why history as a educational field has changed so much in, 100 years. Math and science and other fields, other STEM fields, they change, but they don't change in the span of decades. History is very tied to, I would say, it's tied to politics. It's tied to how we view nations, how we view colonialism, how we view the way that we talk about our own history. And, I think when you have a public educational class, when you have a high school class that doesn't connect with people and tell them, hey, this is important, this is how you got here, and they just show dates on a screen and stuff like that, or just go through like a checklist, then people don't care. I remember in school, we would and I don't know if this was the same way for you guys, but we would repeat the same events every year. So in like 4th grade, we'd learn about the American Revolution up until like, World War II. Maybe not 4th grade, but like 5th, 6th grade. And, they just show like, oh, this is the American Revolution. And then they go to like World War II. And then they repeat that for like 5 grades. And by the time you're a sophomore, you don't care about World War II anymore. You've seen this stuff, for the last few grades. And I think definitely probably the best thing my high school at least had was not a general history course, but multiple different classes on certain topics. And, they were just based on war and stuff. Like we had a Vietnam War class and a World War II class. And I think we had a Revolutionary War class, or we had like a contemporary studies class or something like that. But if you give the students an opportunity to be like, oh, I want to learn about this topic, and it's a class 100% about that, that time frame or that, that event, they'll be a lot more intrigued with it. But that's just kind of the problem with talking about anything generally is, if you have a curriculum that's meant to have 30 kids learn something, not everyone's going to connect with it. But if you have at least one kid that does connect with it, like I know I certainly did in like 6th grade, and, maybe you have some kid that it sparks them and they become a weirdo and they just go on Wikipedia for hours on end and just go through different articles and see, and uncover that sort of thing by themselves. If school can do that, then it's at least a success. But yeah, it's, a lot of people don't have that.
Who is the person who is guiding you through it all? Like Kevin was saying, not having great teachers, professors, etc. That makes a tremendous difference in how really you view all of it, because that there's a bit of a paradox in there where somebody says, why do I need to know this? Well, the irrelevance of history is probably the greatest asset of it.
Mm-hmm.
If I said to somebody, you will know a lot more about different approaches to the world if you travel to Italy and Yemen and Brazil and list off this cross section of 17 or 18 nations. Spend some time there and see how people do things differently and how they think differently. Every single person in the world would say, well, yes, you'd have an appreciation for how to think differently and live differently. You would know how to do it. Well, guess what, folks? That's what history is. It's basically doing a tour of knowledge in that same exact way. It's why you watch shows, TV shows and movies that aren't exactly the same as your life.
Mm-hmm.
How boring would it be if every bit of media you consumed, or even every YouTube channel you watched, was somebody who could be your neighbor? Nobody does that. Nobody wants to do that, because the irrelevance and the differences are what's interesting, what's fascinating, and actually what develops your mind on all of this. But you have to have somebody in front of you who can point out things like that, and then let you go on your own a little bit and explore around a topic. And they put up the bumpers like in bowling and guide a little bit so somebody doesn't live in the gutter. But that blend of the two things actually makes it interesting and gets you somewhere.
That was the best way to describe history, honestly. That made me pumped. So kudos to that. I love that. But yeah, no, that's true. It's about seeing the different perspectives. It's almost like having your own little, magic carpet and essentially traveling to different periods of time. And the greatest thing, the written word's like just the best thing that humans have ever created, because it allows you to just be transported back to these times and see how people, hundreds of years thought in completely different ways to you. My favorite, I think probably my favorite history channel is I have to find the name, but essentially it's Voices from the Past. So shout out to Voices from the Past. But his YouTube channel essentially just takes a document from a first person perspective, say from a Japanese monk traveling to Europe in the 16th century. And they wrote it all down, their thoughts on what Venice was like, their interactions with kings, the little stories that we never hear about. And it's about, and you kind of just realize these are people with the same complex lives as we do today. They had the same hopes and dreams and fears and stuff like that, and they wrote them all down. And that's what I love about hearing about these voices and reading through their thoughts and stuff like that. Because, that's different than just seeing dates. That's different than saying, oh, this took place in the 1600s. It's like, what would it be like to live it? What was it like to live back then? How did people truly see the world? They didn't have maps. They didn't have technology to see, because think about how we see Earth. Like, you can picture Earth. You picture it, we have a photo of it. That is so unique to human history. And that's why it's like when people say, what other time in history would you ever want to live in? Now. Because it's like so many people have died and have, risked their lives and made it their mission just to see a fraction of the world that we can simply explore on Google Maps now. This is a level of the understanding of our own planet that 99.5% of all humans who have ever existed would barely dream of. And it's kind of like, you see it in their writings because everything's a mystery. Going back to the Japanese monks and stuff like that, when they're traveling to Europe, it took years, and they were fundamentally altered men when they came back, because they had essentially spent a third of their life just traveling a continent, a completely foreign land. And it was actually funny, speaking of how we understand the world, European nobles and stuff treated these Japanese monks like celebrities. And part of it was because they kind of misunderstood how big Japan was. In maps back then, Asia was considered so much bigger than it actually was. And Sapangu, which was what Japan was called, was kind of pictured as just another continent. So when someone said they were a lord or a noble in Sapangu, what in actuality would probably be about the size of like a city or whatever, they imagine it being like a massive country, like a France-sized country. And it's kind of fascinating because that's just how, and this was only 400 years ago. And this is just how people view the world. And we're very lucky to kind of have this technology and satellite imagery of how we picture the world and universe and stuff like that. And most people don't. Anyway, I'm ranting. Sorry about that. But no, you got me on. You got me a whole
that's
thing.
the point of this podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
Generating rants like this.
You let me be alone with my thoughts, and it's very nice. I thank you for that. It's a very good format. I could just rant.
we like these thoughts, and that thought triggered a thought that I wanted to bring up, which is that history can allow us, and I guess part of my frustration with looking back on my years as a student of history in schools is that history can allow you to be grateful of the fact that you were born today, the fact that you can look on Google Earth and just scroll around and zoom in to wherever. I mean, that's like a tiny, tiny sliver at the top of the iceberg of what's cool about living in 2022. It's nothing compared to everything else.
What's cool about living in 2022? The fact that I'm 39 years old and I didn't die at 22 of dysentery.
Still alive.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, I was going to say that one of the most interesting history lessons I ever listened to came from an economics professor at a conference that Matt and I, we went to years ago now. This guy, Steve Horowitz, was talking about what life was like in like the late 1800s.
Oh, wow.
Mid to late 1800s. The lecture was like an hour-long lecture, was ostensibly just like, hey, you are really lucky to be alive today. Here's why. Because here's what life was like back, 100 and say 35 years ago, something like that. And some of the examples that he brought up that are things that I had never heard before that everybody should know were things like you would have 11 children because half of them were going to die before the time that they reached the age of 5. Mm-hmm. And also you needed all of those kids because you needed people to work the farm so that you could also survive and have something to eat and harvest your grain or whatever it was. And, oh, by the way, since that, not child death rate was so high, was basically 50-50, if you wanted a child named William, you would name 2 of them William, because one of the Williams was going to die, and you needed a William left over. And that's just what life was like. It's like...
Yeah, or if one died, you just give the same name to a new one, just life goes on.
You just have the next William 2, William the Living.
I vaguely remember
these are
Steve,
things we should hear.
Just to be like...
and I think Steve was...
No, continue on. No, sorry.
Oh, I think he referenced that Thomas Hobbes line, that life, and this was probably around 1600, that life is nasty, brutish, and short. And it's only very, very recently that we wouldn't describe life with those 3 words. Like right now, it's generally pretty good. It's generally pretty comfortable. You tend to buy food more than having to grow your own. And
you wouldn't get that sense reading social media, though. Everything is a nightmare world. It's an upside down hellscape. Always.
There's like nothing. That's why
a little context here, folks. A little context.
Going on social media every day is, I mean, it's a chore for everybody, but I think especially for more history-minded people, it just is a constant pang because everything's the worst ever. Everything is, worst. This is the worst year in history. This is the worst time in history. People, of course, exaggerate and stuff like that. But I'm just always so tempted wherever I say someone like be like, oh, this is the worst year in history. I'm be like, do you know what the 300s were? Were you in ancient Rome at that time? And it's like, of course, that helps nobody because we're not ancient Romans. But every history person feels tempted to do that. If you ever say something's the worst ever, they're gonna. I think. Up until whenever people were like Obama was like the worst president ever or whatever like that. And I remember people always saying James Buchanan. James Buchanan, he caused it. He caused the Civil War. But that was always, but that's, yeah, history gives that perspective.
It's
I think
not their fault though. They were never taught what happened in 300s in Rome and what life was like. They have no idea.
Yeah, it really is just everyone has an interest in something. I don't know anything about botany, and I'm sure I would say something that would make a botanist, or I could say something that would make a physicist, absolutely laugh. And I think it's just something that happens when, because people diversify their interests. That's what happens from having a civilization where we're not all hunters and gatherers. Everyone can specialize in different things. So it's like, yeah, if somebody doesn't understand history, I usually give them the benefit of the doubt, because yeah, most people probably aren't, they don't do this as especially doing this as a job online. I feel incredibly lucky because I can have this as a career, going out and learning new stuff about the past benefits me in my job. And most people don't have that. So if somebody doesn't get history or anything in my field, I don't hold that against them at all. I mean, like so much of Jeopardy is that too. Because this is a bit of a tangent, but me and my wife watch Jeopardy all the time. And these are people that answer, questions that I completely blank on. I have no idea what some specific part of the human body is, or what this thing would be called in another language. And then these same people that answer questions that blow my mind, I've never heard these words before, they won't know what year a specific war took place in. They don't know what certain figure existed. I saw someone, this isn't really history, but it's more of geography. There was an episode that they simply just had a picture of Germany, and they were like, what country is this? And then the same person that answered some physics question only 5 minutes earlier said, that's Poland.
Close enough.
That's Poland. Yeah. Or other than like Italy, most people
got there.
A lot of people don't get countries right. A lot of people, it's just like, unless it's like Italy or whatever, they don't know. But that's because most people have jobs. So most people have, or at least most people don't have jobs that allow historians and stuff to just go through these facts and stuff and learn.
I got an idea as you were talking about people thinking this is the worst year ever. I have a solution for us to try. I think all of us need to try it. On social media, when somebody complains about how awful things are, you need to reply with a very grim scenario that is historical. So somebody, I don't know, Betty White dies and people are like, oh my God, it's January and it's already the worst year ever. And you reply with something like, yeah, I know, the Vandals burned down my hut, murdered my parents, and raped my sisters before they enslaved me. And just do that as if it had just happened today. And you'd keep doing these things, these replies on every social media platform until people start to get that.
Every single.
You know what? It's actually not that bad.
That could
anymore.
be its own account.
It would be
like a whole. No, I'm serious. Like one of those gimmick accounts, and that's all that account does all day. It's like horrific historical replies.
It's the historical actuallys. That's all it is. I'm just going around. Well, actually. Oh man, that would be the best way to underground advertise myself and also vilify myself across all of social media. Every single time somebody would see my avatar, they would just think of me going, well, actually, you know. Man.
It's true though. I mean, it's people don't even realize how much time existed in even the recent past. So, like you were saying, people would travel, like these monks would travel across a continent. Man, do you know what it's like to sit in a slow-moving wagon for 12 hours?
No.
Man, the absolute level.
Guess what? It's not cool.
The patience people must have had.
Yes. Yes. There's no other option. And that's a really hard thing to understand.
Without your smartphone, without the internet. without your Nintendo Switch.
They at least had Walkmans
with
back then,
like
didn't
one book, maybe just the Bible, I guess. I don't know.
But even in a car, the scenario is changing constantly. If you're moving at 3 miles an hour, you'd better like the scenery, because you're going to look at that exact same thing for like the next 2 hours, and you're going to be with the same however many people. But that's how do you appreciate those types of differences when, by definition, it being history, you have never experienced it and almost certainly never will? How can you understand and appreciate what that's like?
It's one of those things that even in our modern world, because we live, in an industrial nation, and, there are people today that are living just as, they have for hundreds of years. And, that's even going back. That's why it's almost like leaving certain parts of the country is like going back in the past. But it's not the fact that they're just not developed. It's that we don't understand how quickly in the last 100 years things have completely changed with industrialization. And, it's created new problems and stuff like that.
We want to help you make something and mean something. And we say that phrase all the time because when you're making something and you know it means something, even if it's just to you, that's when you feel pretty good about what you're creating. The support for the Create Unknown in recent weeks has been incredible. Animators, artists, musicians, YouTubers, aspiring filmmakers, comedians, it is crazy how talented everybody in this community is. Consider joining the Create Unknown Patreon. Every dollar that comes through goes straight into the podcast and its community. That means more highlights videos. It means a big Minecraft project that's on the way. And eventually we'd like to manufacture custom piss bottles so you never have to leave your battle station. And being a patron unlocks participation in all of our live recordings. You've seen the roster of guests we've had. Having access to their minds is a unique opportunity. You can go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown or click the link that's in the description. Every little bit helps, and your support means absolutely everything to us. Patreon.com/thecreateunknown, links in the description. We appreciate you, Space Cowboys.
But to get back into patience and stuff like that, you mentioned wagons. I think the most interesting stuff is castles. Have any of you gone to a castle?
No.
Yeah, in England and Wales.
In England and Wales. So those, I went to a castle in Ireland, which probably wasn't as big as the England castles, but castles are massive structures that feel incredibly cramped. Am I wrong?
No, I think that's accurate. If it's not like whatever's designed as the Great Hall or massive, meeting area type thing, everything else is generally pretty small, isn't it? I hadn't thought about that, but that's accurate.
Yeah, and it just kind of feels, it's like the big, massive palaces that we imagine. That's stuff that's only existed for like 200 years. Go back 300 or so years, and you're gonna get stuff that's usually the equivalent of medieval castles. And these are areas where it's like all the stone floors are just completely stone. The architecture and everything is just incredibly cramped because they don't have the technology to allow for these high arching sort of I think just the basis of the American house, the average American house probably feels more open than most castles that have existed in history, like just in the basis. And I think it's
absolutely.
and it's it's a common kind of joke, but it's like somebody that is just middle class today has lived a better life than any of the royalty in the past. And it's just because of how technology and progression and stuff like that. And of course, your half your children not dying is a good thing too. But but I mean, history.
The thing about, I think it was Rockefeller that's like, would you rather be you right now, or would you rather be this ultra wealthy Rockefeller type 100 plus years ago? Well, the standard of living for literally everyone I know now is many, many times better than what the standard of living was for the very wealthiest person in the world, even 120 years ago.
I think in terms of probably the most fascinating idea of the span of not just in because I'm trying to think in terms of communication, that's probably the biggest change. And, getting back to YouTube and internet and stuff like that. I think I think we really don't get, especially younger people get, how big of a deal it is to be able to instantly communicate with somebody across the world. Because I'm in the South right now. If I had to even do this, podcast or whatever, even 10 years ago, it would have to require me to actually be there physically. And, it really shrinks our perception of the world just being able to instantly communicate with everybody. But I think it was something you said, it sparked the idea in my head of we don't really appreciate interstates almost. And, interstates have their own problems for what they've historically done for cities and stuff like that. But in shrinking the country, it is absolutely insane. There was a story. There was an expedition only 80 years ago with actual cars. And the expedition was basically to take the cars from Washington, D.C. to California. And I don't remember the specific time that it took, but it was about like a month just driving in like the 1900s from one end of the country to the other. And it was because the interstate system just did not exist. The infrastructure going past St. Louis didn't really exist. These were relatively small trucks and cars getting constantly stuck in the mud. They could not progress past mountains. They had to basically take weeks to just get across certain states. And it was because the infrastructure, the interstates just didn't exist. The same span of time takes like 2 days now. And, that in itself has made, it's kind of why the idea of United States and stuff like that has kind of almost seemed strange, is because, people back even 100 years ago thought of the states as their own individual countries. And it's because that distance felt so much longer than it does today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really weird to think about. And also reminds me of like this perpetual railroad versus highway debate that people bring up. I should not even get into that.
No, you know what? Do it.
No.
Let's do it.
Get canceled.
There is actually a high speed in my state. There's a high speed railway being planned from Dallas to Houston. It's like the Japanese trains almost, and it would take 2 hours to go between the cities now. It's because it's like 120 miles an hour. And I'm just thinking, we need more of those. We just, no hyperloops, no anything. We just need more high-speed trains. So that's where I'm gonna put it in this debate between interstates and trains. We need more trains. That's
give California a call and ask them how that's going.
I'm not super familiar with that.
Oh.
I heard it didn't go well though, or something like that.
So they're still trying.
They're still it's because they don't have us. That's it. We'll give them the YouTube bunnies, and then they'll do it.
But speaking of YouTube money, I want to talk about demonetization.
Yes, to wrap it
before I forget.
Yeah.
Because you talk about things, earlier in the podcast, you mentioned, can we say the word Nazis on this podcast without, getting demonetized? Mm-hmm. Well, when you're talking about historical events, it's kind of important to name like the people, places, and things in which they occurred. However, YouTube doesn't always really play nice with that. So what has your experience been on that front?
That is true. So basically, YouTube is not kind to the History Channel community, and I know it's a small community that, of course, this massive conglomeration's not going to care about who they affect, because it's like, at the end of the day, YouTube only cares about selling advertising space, and advertisers only care about their products being associated with family-friendly content. And history just does not, interesting history at least does not clash well with that. And so when YouTube sees people talking about Hitler or, the Confederates or, any controversial topic, or 9/11 especially, whenever they see that, they never think, oh, this is somebody teaching about why this thing was a bad thing. for some reason, YouTube just thinks of it as, oh, they're promoting this. This is, even having this word at all, this is a negative, bad thing. And it's because they don't want that associated for their advertisers. And, we all know how over the years that has happened, but there was a period of time where it was getting really bad. I would say during 2017 and like 2019, YouTube really cracked down on ever mentioning even war. You could not talk about war, because if you did, they would think that you were talking about something else, and they would just immediately crack down on you. So there were so many people, friends of mine, that they were struggling to keep going because they couldn't make money dedicating so much time into making videos and doing all this research. And then YouTube's just like, oh, that's a bad topic, to try again. And they just instantly demonetize. Most of the time you could not even review. They would just immediately strike that down. Which, I mean, my Spike TV video wasn't really educational, but I'm not shocked that video was struck down. But most of the time, they don't have to be that controversial. I know a friend of mine, Armchair Historian, he has a legitimate company and stuff like that, and it's he has people that he hires and stuff like, and artists and editors and stuff. And every single time they put out a high quality video, YouTube just says, this is controversial, you can't do it. And the problem with how this site works is most people really only know 4 or 5 historical topics. And 2 of those happen to be, World War II and the Civil War, because that's what we're taught in school. So those are usually the most highest viewed videos that also aren't going to make any money, because YouTube just slaps them down. So yeah, that this has been something that really has plagued historical YouTube for a while. I would say it's getting better, but I mean, you're always on a nice edge with stuff like this. You always have to censor what you say. I actually did a thing where, because on my channel, I don't know if you're not familiar with my channel, I have little characters that are representing countries. They're not Poland balls, but they're like inspired by Poland balls. And on my Nazi guy, I was never able to show the swastika. They absolutely hated me showing the swastika or the Confederate flag. Those were the two no-nos. So what I did is I did a little bit of self-censorship. I replaced the Nazi swastika with the YouTube logo. And and the best part was they were 100% fine with it. They're like, oh, good. And you know what? I never had any problems since. It bypassed the system and it worked. So YouTube is just perfectly fine with me calling them Nazis as long as I don't show a swastika. That's it. They're
as
fine.
long as you don't call Nazis. Like, does anybody see the irony here?
Oh, everyone gets the joke.
Hello.
That's
so
never
ridiculous.
I never have ever said, I've never explicitly called YouTube out about it. I never even make reference to it in the videos. I just show them. I just show the Nazi, and they have the YouTube logo, and everyone kind of gets in on the joke, and they're like, okay, I get it. And YouTube's fine with it.
Gosh.
And the funniest thing is a few other channels started doing that too. So it's not just me anymore. It's any time a history channel ever talks about World War II, a lot of the times they just show the YouTube logo in lieu of a swastika. And now, the swastika almost looks weird for me now, because I spend so much time editing and looking at these characters. I look at a Nazi flag and I'm like, that's not right. That has to be the play button. But yeah, either way, demonetization is not fun. But yeah, I think there's a bunch of, every community deals with this sort of censorship. I mean, imagine for you guys, is there ever like a topic that you ever can't, on your main channels and stuff, that you can't ever talk about? Or
killing babies, apparently. That's a big no-no, in case anybody was on the fence about whether or not, killing babies would get their video demonetized, or whether or not they should mention it. Don't, because it will. That didn't go too
Kevin
well.
means that in a literal sense, not like a video about the abortion debate or something. About
that probably would too.
Mother,
yeah.
Well, yeah, and it does. A lot of the channels are deemed political if they talk about anything like that. But no, in Kevin's instance, it was about a woman being tried for the murder of her children, and that's when I think we all found out that baby killing and AdSense play very poorly in combination.
Yeah. They don't mix very well. It got through in the beginning, but then like a few hours later, the YouTube gods were like, I don't know about this lady killing her children. Probably don't want
Yeah. See,
the Starbucks ad playing against that.
That's always the funniest. That's the funniest thing. And I think as online content creators, we all mutually get the hypocrisy. And I'm going to go back to when you mentioned, what if YouTube didn't exist? For mainstream shows, mainstream cable shows and stuff like this, they have advertisers promote on their content all the time. And you'll have like investigation discovery. You'll have mainstream cable news. You'll have TV talking about topics that are, controversial and violent. And you'll have stuff where, it's just talking about real people who have been murdered on these investigation shows and stuff like that. And, advertisers and, all massive companies will promote their products on this stuff. But if a YouTuber did the same exact thing, then we're risking it. We're pushing it. We have to follow so many different rules now in terms of censorship. Then ironically, cable TV has to. And it's like, this was not the way it was 10 years. It was supposed to be the opposite. The internet's where you're able to talk about and express stuff, while on mainstream TV, it's nope. They can get away with the real stuff. We just, but yeah, So that's when censorship and stuff like that. That's how it is. Yeah.
Well, we have a lot of questions, but I want to bring up one more topic before we jump into everybody's very, very good questions too. There's this draw in all things history that's like, put yourself in the shoes of whoever is related to the event. Put yourself in the time period, and that's always really gotten to me, because there is no way that you and your mind and your values would be in that place and time. It is not possible. I mean, you can do it laterally, like somebody could say, to some degree, drop yourself in the middle of the January 6th protests. What do you do? Well, that's kind of real. But when you say, imagine what it was like during the revolution or something, especially with kids, I think they have a hard time not thinking about themselves in a historical event. So it's something like, this kid in Chattanooga is like, well, I wouldn't have gone along with the Confederacy during the Civil War. Bullshit, you wouldn't. The odds are overwhelming that you, in 8th grade at 13 or 14 or whatever, would have sat in the schoolhouse desperately waiting to get older so you could join Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry. That's probably what you thought. And your values now have absolutely nothing to do with how you would have developed intellectually, morally, or anything like that in any of these historical times. How do you get history to mean something to somebody while separating who they are now from that history? Does that make sense?
It does. That's one of the. This is often something I sometimes think about is, we're all products of our environment, and that happens in the historical sense, too. We're all Americans who were born after, centuries of sort of this change and events occurring. And it's like, we are able to look past, and when we're products of all that has happened before. But it's like, if you were plopped into that time, you're affected by the environment around you. You aren't going to have this 21st century mentality of morality and stuff like that. I mean, there still were people that did, but they were unique, and those people only become less and less the farther back you go. And so, people say, oh, I wouldn't follow the way that, this bad historical event happened. I would be different. And it's like, the majority of people don't. And it's usually just because people only care about their immediate. I mean, most people historically have only cared about their immediate family and having a job and having food on their plate. That's what most people do. They don't really care about, grand politics. They don't care about, the legacy they'll have historically, most people just simply want to get by. And so a lot of times that's led to really, the worst atrocities in history is most people just kind of being complacent and going along with it. And it's kind of an uncomfortable aspect that we think of ourselves as like, oh yeah, would I be different? Would I change? And it's like, no, your personality is completely unique to living in this modern world and being an American and having the education and upbringing that you did. You would be, if you were born back then, you would be in a completely different upbringing. And I think that's a very uncomfortable thing for most people to kind of think about. But I think that's almost that almost is that makes me kind of happy, because it's like you can be in a world that you aren't that. There are aspects that you don't have to do that. You don't have to. Yeah. So but yes. Sorry, I went off a little bit, but yeah. But you're
No, that's just a hard one though, because it takes a lot of nuance and a lot of discomfort, like you said. You saying it was uncomfortable, that's hugely important to realize, that you have to get comfortable with some things that you would just not be okay thinking now.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, most people don't even, it's asking a kid, because going back to, you were talking about kids in history and stuff. It's like most kids, couldn't relate to somebody in the 19th century or the 18th century, but they also can't relate to their parents. They can't relate to a time. I mean, because I remember there was a time before the internet existed. There was a time before social media existed. And for a kid today, that feels like a completely different foreign world. And we're asking the same people that think that their parents lived in a whole different time to relate to somebody 100 or 200 years in the past. And it's like most just don't. And it's, it kind of takes going through. Well, I think actually, ironically, it's I remember there's a Vsauce video that mentioned the term Sonder. And it's the idea, the idea that everyone has lived as complex of a life as you have. And there's, I think it was even mentioned in that same video, historical Sonder, the idea that every single human throughout history has lived the same exact complex life as you have. And it's kind of like, until you understand what Sonder is and historical Sonder is, and growing up and how we're products of our environment and growing up in that historical time frame, then you'd be a completely different person, and your personality. And so, yeah.
It's funny that you bring that up, because Kevin, do you remember Psychic Pebbles talking about the image of New York City that totally fascinated him, because he got obsessed with each individual person in that photo having this crazy complex life?
Yeah, it's actually one of the highlights. I pulled that as a highlight clip from that episode, so it's on the Create Unknown YouTube channel.
Oh,
as
really?
Psychic Pebbles. I don't remember what I titled it, but yeah, it's like Psychic Pebbles motivational speech or something like that. And he's talking about that image and how much it motivates him and inspires him, actually.
Oh, well, I should watch that episode. But I mean, that's it was an old one. It was an old one. Oh, it was an old one. It wasn't the most recent one. It was a different one.
Yeah. No. That was like 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was an older one.
Because I was thinking, like, did I not pay attention throughout the whole thing? Because I saw that episode and it was good. And I was like, I remember the Chris Chan talking about Chris Chan. I don't remember the.
Well, Chris Chan has also had a wildly complex life, just like all of us. That's Sonder.
Almost the. Okay, because now we're going to talk about Chris. That before we get to the questions, it's Chris Chan Sonder. That's what it is. If you lived in Chris Chan's position, would you have turned out like him? And it's like that's a
question.
Would you have made
anyway? Moving on to our next questions.
There you go. Next, we're talking about Chris Chan's. Time to change the topic immediately.
I think we have some questions from our patrons. Matt, if you'd like to hit those up.
We do have to get to them because they are very good again. It's always so awesome when the patrons have substantial questions that really probe a guest. And we got a bunch of them this time. The first one is from NRM, and The question is, what is your favorite point in history to talk about that nobody else seems to talk about?
Ooh, I would say the late 16th century and early 17th century. It's that because it's the wackiest time. It's the wackiest time period. Because it's a mix between medieval sort of the medieval world, but before the Enlightenment. And most people kind of think that we go from like medieval to Renaissance to the Enlightenment, and it's like no, we had a messy period between the Renaissance and the Enlightenment where things were just crazy. You had the English Civil War, you had people. And I don't know if you guys have a second screen next to you, but there is a fashion where people just wore those giant collars, and it was it was probably I often look at the fashion of European people in that time, and they have the giant poofy collars, they have the men wearing the heels, the almost alien expressions on just this world, and I thought it would be interesting if just society went even harder in that direction. Instead of going in this modern world, people just remained wearing the giant collars and just started looking more like sci-fi people. That would have been cool. But no, the main reason I find this area of time very fascinating is most people don't talk about it. It's kind of just a period where there were a bunch of civil wars. There was a little ice age where food production essentially kind of stopped because there was a massive cold period that made the harvests shorter. And what it led to was just this 150 years of just usually perpetual conflict. And I think like the average height of Europeans went down by like 6 inches. And then once you get to like the middle of the 18th century, it kind of just ends, and then you get into sort of Napoleon American Revolution, Napoleonic era. But this is kind of just the period of history that I would say from like the 1540s to the 1740s. Nobody really ever talks about it. I think especially in American history, because think about American history. You ever talk about Columbus landing on America? And then you get to the American Revolution. It's like, yeah, you got like Jamestown and stuff like that, but you don't really ever talk about, like, nobody ever remembers Jamestown. Nobody ever really talks about Jamestown. It's like Pocahontas and stuff like that. But it's like Jamestown was still like 200 years after that. So you got just this 200-year period where everyone's just kind of collectively decided to ignore outside of, maybe the Renaissance happened somewhere in that area. But it has a lot of fascinating just it's that blend period. It's that awkward period from the medieval age to the modern era. That's my favorite.
So we need to talk more about the Spanish invading Georgia in the War of Jenkins' Ear. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's essential. That's essential. Yes. The Spanish fascinate me in history, just in terms of how everywhere they were, just in how they explored everywhere in North America, and of course they tried to claim it all. But it's just places that we don't really ever think ever had the Spanish in them, like North Dakota. And it's just like, yep, they're there. They saw it, and then they just went on back down.
Well, the next one is extremely important. It's from the Kino Corner. How would history have changed if Julius Caesar had been a furry?
Oh, okay. I need to think about. I need to get the.
You had me in the first half there. You had me. You had me in the first half.
I was bored. I was like, oh man, another Julius Caesar question, and then furry. I'm like, oh wow. Let's get the noggin jogging. I gotta think. All right. So if Julius Caesar was a furry, okay. So what he would do is, instead of declaring himself, counselor for life and stuff like that, he instead declares himself a furry. And he says that everyone must now, how they wear the lion sort of stuff over their armor. Well, that's now their personality. That's now their persona. And all of Rome just kind of gets sucked into the cult of Caesar almost. Augustus has to become a furry now. Octavian has to become a furry. And there's Cleopatra. And Cleopatra already has association with furries. So it's a thing where basically it sort of spreads. It's like a Justinian plague in a way of furries, where everyone wants to impress Caesar. And when Caesar crosses the Rubicon and, the Senate basically decides, we're anti-furry now. And then they stab a furry to death in the center of the Senate. That's Roman history. That's one of the defining eras of Roman history. Julius Caesar does the exact same stuff. He's just a furry while he does it. And then there's statues of him and he has like his fursuit on.
I think we just got our first highlight clip from this episode.
I think we did.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, German has one that is a bit more serious. Were the Dark Ages actually that dark?
Oh, you could probably ask that same question to about
That's a big one.
10 different medieval YouTube channels, and they would all say no. And I would agree with them. It's the Dark Ages is something that's mostly been just kind of invented by Renaissance Europe. It's just sort of that idea of, we were barbaric back then, but now we're good. There was a time period that I would say there was probably a genuine Dark Age, at least in Western Europe. And that was probably like immediately after the fall of the Roman Empire up until like the 900s. But after like the 900s, there's periods of little tiny renaissances, especially throughout Britain and Ireland, where there's just a flourish of culture. And there's I think we really kind of underestimate the medieval era and the dark ages. That I haven't used that term in so long that I have to get it back into my vocabulary. But yeah, no, the Dark Ages really were not so bad for your average person as they would be relatively in the Roman world. For comparison, I would much rather live in Dark Ages, like France and Britain. I mean, especially probably Dark Ages like Italy, than I would ever want to live in Rome before the fall of the Roman Empire. Like that last like 200, 300 years of the Roman Empire, it was not good to be an average citizen. There's massive inflation, often civil wars that would still devastate the countryside just as much as any Dark Ages would. And there was instability, even more instability than there was during the Dark Ages, because medieval, we'll just say medieval era because it's easier. But during the medieval era, you at least had security with a feudal lord, while Rome didn't provide that. So really, Dark Ages, talking about it really depends on what time you're talking about, where you're talking about, because especially for, the Islamic world and most of the world outside of specifically Western Europe, things were relatively good. Like, I mean, outside of the Mongol Empire and the Black Death that came from it, most stuff from like east of Greece wasn't really in a bad situation. China would have rises and falls and stuff like that. But Dark Ages is a very Western European centric ideal that was invented in the Renaissance. And for everyone in the Eastern Roman Empire onward, it was not that bad. And for Western Europe, it was only bad for like 200 years. But yeah, no, I think, sorry, rambling.
No, that's okay. All I'm hearing is, the Mongols and the Black Death is that you just think China created the virus. Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, no, I said Mongolians created the virus. That's what I said. They were behind it all along.
Another one from German is also really good here. What's the video that you've made that required you to make the most assumptions about the topic?
Oh, okay. Do you mind if
That's hard.
I'm gonna go through my YouTube channel. I'm just gonna look it up, and I'm gonna look up what I
sure
made the most assumptions on. I would say there was a lot. Okay, so the general rule for when it comes to assuming stuff is the farther back in history it is, the more I'm assuming. So, I have a video like about if Al Gore won in 2000, and that's recent history. We kind of know the immediate effects of Al Gore not winning, and you can draw a lot less time has passed since then that it's easier to imagine in the short term. But the farther back you go, say you start imagining if the United States didn't exist. You start imagining if Columbus never colonized the Americas. You start going back to if the Roman Empire never fell. That's more and more centuries that you kind of have to imagine and fill in the blanks with. And it starts getting to a point where you start thinking, okay, well, this sort of society doesn't exist for 1,000 years. I would say, to answer the question, though, definitely probably any Roman Empire video. The Roman and Byzantine empires are probably the hardest because not only am I taking a civilization that hasn't existed for almost 2,000 years and try to draw off that, I'm still using a period of Rome that, it could have easily just evolved. It would have just completely changed. And so it's thinking, okay, Rome just kind of stays in a time capsule. And it's just sort of this warped version of itself that naturally it would have evolved and its society would have changed and stuff like that. But because this is all an assumption, they just kind of stay the same for the sake of the scenario. And that always makes me mad because, I feel like there's so much more that I can talk about with Rome, but eventually it just becomes super fiction. It just becomes, okay, the Gauls would have done this and the Britons would have done this. And definitely the farther back you go, the more assumptions are made. So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense that you'd have to get to any conclusion that made sense. You'd have to fill in so many blanks. Right. Speaking of going back in the past, Sheeb asked if you had to go back in time and space to see one historical event for yourself, what would it be?
Ooh, one historical event.
Yep.
Ooh, that's a doozy. How far back are we talking? How far back? Do we have a limit?
Indefinitely. I think there's no limit there, but the only rule we're going to put on it is that you're definitely going to see it safely and then come back. So you can do anything awful and you're going to be okay.
I would want to see. So there's two. I would say the farthest back. I want to see that meteor kill the dinosaurs. I want to see what did it. I want to see a dinosaur, and I want to see him die. I want to see that fireball. That's messed up. But
wait! You got to eat a dinosaur first. This is my big thing. Like I want to eat a dinosaur. You have to have a Stega burger or something first, and then watch them die.
That's okay. Sometimes I think about this. I look at prehistoric animals and I think about how they would have tasted. You go like, sure, dinosaurs are like big birds. They're the equivalent of big chickens. But there was a time period where there were giant arachnids in the seas. Those are the best lobsters in the world. That's monster lobsters. We will never be able to know what a giant, there's a big sea scorpion that existed. That thing looks delicious. And I want, I can just imagine the equivalent of a swordfish, but it's just right on the table. It's a big old ancient sea lobster that hasn't existed for 300 million years. But yeah, no, that's, I think.
The part I like about this is that it's you coming back and immediately like running to the airport, flying to Washington. You're knocking on the door at the Smithsonian and you're like, you have to let me in because I am 15 minutes away from literally taking a dinosaur dump. You're going to want to see this.
This is how Jurassic Park happens. It doesn't happen through amber. It happens through a pile of shit. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
The advertisements for the new Jurassic Park movie would be a lot different. Instead of an amber like thing, it's just a big old pile of shit with a dinosaur carved on it. It would scientifically. That's the proteins. That's the DNA, the dinosaur DNA, right in that toilet.
That makes
And
sense.
to weave the science in.
Yeah. It'll work.
W Quiz asks whether you think your channel inspired Marvel's What If, because he thinks that it did.
You know, I would.
Oh, What If is so old. I when we
Is
were
it?
kids, What If was it? Yeah. That's an old.
Was
that
it
would be
really?
Yeah, that's
yeah.
yes.
It's a comic series that's existed for a little bit, but that would be funny if I just took the credit for it. Just I took the piss on
Claim
social
it.
media.
Oh, absolutely. claim it.
Marvel stole. No one else has ever thought of. Marvel should pay me for this whole multiverse thing they're going through. Yeah, that should just be the
Threaten to
multiverse
sue.
of madness.
It started.
We will
What
do a
If started
GoFundMe.
in 1977.
Oh.
So yeah, it's older than us.
I wasn't even started in
Yeah.
1977.
Exactly.
It's what ifs are just such a good concept. It's just imagining. Yeah, what if this thing was different? I think that's just something innately human about thinking. Yeah, what if it went different? What would it be?
Well, on the movie train here, Kino Corner asks about whether you enjoy making videos about movies now, and if you'll review alternate history movies on Pointless Hub, things like Bill and Ted.
Oh, I've always wanted to do a video about Bill and Ted on Pointless Hub.
That's a good idea.
I love Bill and Ted, and I think sometimes I've watched Bill and Ted so much as a kid. Even though I do all this historical stuff, those like Abe Lincoln and short Napoleon trying to get into Waterloo, that's still my mental image of what these historical figures look like, even though they have portraits and pictures. Like that's Abe Lincoln going party on dudes and stuff. That's forever with me. But I've always wanted to do a Bill and Ted video. So I would love to do that. I don't know if was that all the question was asking, or I thought there was a little bit more, wasn't there?
Whether that was actually, it can morph into the next question from Kino. Old History Hub, Pointless Hub, Knowledge Hub, Porn Hub. What is next in Hubland?
You know what?
What's the next
Pornhub
hub?
might have been a mistake on my part.
Isn't that funding this whole endeavor with all history nonsense?
I actually make no money from these videos at all. I just secretly am the kingpin of porn. I think I sometimes wonder, that's a big what if question in itself. What if I didn't have hub in the last name of this channel? So let's go a little bit of a tangent and then we'll get back to the question. But the reason it's called Alternate History Hub actually is because I started this channel 10 years ago when I was in like high school. And it was just one alternate history channel in sort of a small community of only like, these channels only had like 1,000 to 2,000 subs, but everyone named themselves after the state they were in. And there was someone called Alternate History PT named after Alternate History Portugal. There was someone called Alternate History New York. And if I had followed that trend, I would have named myself Alternate History Ohio. But I also thought that's probably not a great way to brand myself. And I thought if this channel gets big, I mean, I need a catchy name. So Hub kind of stuck out with me because it was the center of everything. I was like, I want this to be the center of alternate history on YouTube. Yeah. So I was just like Alternate History Hub. And it wasn't until, because I was an innocent wee lad, it wasn't until like a year later, someone was like, oh, so like Pornhub? And I was like, it's like, shit, I would have named it something different. But Alternate History Center doesn't really have as much of a ring. But getting back to Pointless Hub and Knowledge Hub and stuff like that, Knowledge Hub is actually run by my brother, and so he's took it in a completely different direction than it's. Originally, it was like a geography channel. It was called Geography Hub, and we sort of he took it over and he rebranded it as just a general knowledge sort of channel, and now it talks about mostly technology. Knowledge Hub is run by my brother, and he puts so much work into those videos, and he's run it for about 7 years now. So I just say that because people still sometimes get our voices mixed up because we have the same similar like monotone sort of voice. So everyone's like, good job, Cody. And he's like, fuck you. And he's like nothing. It's like, yeah, I don't blame him. That would people, but internet people are stupid, internet YouTube commenters. I never even look at YouTube commenters because it's just like sometimes they call me Tyler sometimes, and so it's just how it is. But I think right now, Pointless Hub is definitely my main is my next venture. The channel's almost at 100,000 subs, which I'm so I thank you everybody who's subscribed and has been supporting it. But the purpose of that channel was to not just talk about alternate history or history and stuff. I want to talk about topics that I generally like video games and movies and stuff like Halo or I just did a video about stupid disaster movies like 2012, and it's just like, hey, look at that thing's dumb, but it's very freeing to do it because I don't have to constantly be thinking. It's just something to relax, and it's I feel so lucky that people are supporting what's essentially a side project. So thank you everybody who's supported me for this. Hopefully, I think we all like 10,000 subs, or left, but yeah, very grateful.
Well, I love the hub concept because it's the flexibility in it is awesome, and I think it's just going to keep serving you well as things go on. It's certainly not trapped.
We can do the next one is just more. Pointless Hub. I'll just change my name. I'll just switch between the channels. It'll be okay. We got Pointless Hub this week. Hi. Use it.
Hey, not that much.
Yeah. So sorry.
We got a couple more, and then you're free. Google Docs asks an important one. Do you wear socks when you sleep? And what do you think of people who do the opposite of what you do?
Oh,
are you a sock wearer during slumber?
This is fun. I don't know if she's going to like me talking about this, but I'm going to do it. So I don't wear socks while I sleep, but my wife does. And this has been a frequent conversation we've had as I look at her and I'm like, why you wear socks? And she's like, why don't you? And I'm like, because I want my feet to breathe. And she's like, well, I like my feet snug. And anyway, I'm drawing up the divorce papers, but
I was going to say, how could you even marry a snug
I didn't
footer?
know until I didn't pay attention, at least until after. I think it was we've been married 2 years. I just noticed a few months ago. It wasn't until like we were in bed, because she always bundles up in bed. She has the blankets over her feet, and it isn't until I notice, and I'm like, oh, you do that? And she's like, you don't? And it was like a revelation. It was a crack. It was the first crack in our relationship. So
everybody knows, get that away, like straight away on the first date. Ask about that. It'll go well.
I'm glad that we technically did. So, I didn't give you the candy, but we did get that very major relationship hurdle out of the way. But to answer your question, sock people should burn. So.
Wait,
except for
can I interject really quickly with a Kevin sock thing that I think about, and I've never been able to
bring it up.
I've never been able to like I have this like joke that I've always wanted to make on Twitter, but I can't get the formulation right, so I'll just butcher it on the podcast instead. And that's if you ever want to feel like a total psychopath, when you get out of the shower, just put your socks on first, and then just stand there, just totally naked, but just wearing socks.
Oh,
it's the creepiest feeling, which it shouldn't be. Like, why is that creepy? But it is. Do it.
Feels like
do it.
That feels.
Put on the socks, but nothing else.
That feels like the human equivalent of just being soggy cereal. Like you just let the cereal.
No, I'm not. You could dry your feet. You could dry your feet. It's not about the socks being wet.
Okay.
No. Yeah, sorry. No. It's not about the socks being wet.
Socks only.
It's just, and this might be like it might be creepier for guys than it is for girls, but for guys, just wearing socks and nothing else is really horrific. And I don't know why.
It's like nails on a chalkboard thinking about it.
It is.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
It's like people that shit, but they're like crouched over the bowl or something like that. And I'm just like, or they shit standing up. That's what that is. Oh man, you know what? Next time I'm going to do that. After I take a shower, I'm gonna put my socks on first. I'll feel disgusted with myself. and I'll be like this.
And
Kevin, how long does he stand?
Yeah,
is it
how long
a
do you
30-second thing? Does it have to be 60 seconds?
Oh, 30 seconds is plenty of time. Yeah, you don't. It doesn't have to be like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, just feel your nudity with the socks
enough to soak it in, to just take it in.
Yeah,
I hope Ben puts that line in the intro. That's what.
Yeah, it's the creepiest. It's the creepiest thing that I can think of that's so innocuous. There's nothing on the surface creepy about this, but in practice, it's a nightmare.
It's fine. Thinking about it, if you're wet and your feet have socks on it, it's creepy when you're wet. But when you're dry, that's just like the most that's the strongest energy thing you can do. That's the most big dick energy thing you can do. Just be completely naked. Just have your socks on. What?
There's a follow-up that's like a close second, which is just put like a t-shirt on and nothing else. And then stand there for 30 seconds. I think the socks are worse.
Donald Duckett.
But yeah, Donald Duckett. Yeah. That's also really uncomfortable for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Just be like, I want to live like Winnie the Pooh now. That's it. I just want to.
Yeah.
No pants.
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh.
Get stuck in objects and eat honey with my freaking hands. I never noticed he did that. I noticed, like, I always thought he had like a spoon or something, and it kind of creeped me out. And it's like,
no,
like, you savage.
That's just his hand.
You barbarian. You cretin. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you want your wife to leave you, then just put your socks on and walk around, walk out of the bathroom like that.
I'll be like, give me a hug. I got my socks on. Yeah.
She will run to the courthouse.
I just come out. I'm completely naked. And I say, knock my socks off. That's it.
That's the worst.
Yeah, that's the worst.
No.
Hey, that's how they end the Valentine's Day, podcast.
Yeah.
Knock my socks off completely naked. Yeah.
Yep. And the next thing you get are just the divorce papers.
That's for next year. That's for next Valentine's Day. Yeah, the real.
We will machine gun these last couple, and they're good too. NRM points out that history is so often Western centric.
Yeah.
What's the most accessible, easiest, most interesting non-Western topic that somebody who's mostly familiar with Western history could get into to start broadening that horizon?
The problem is that there's so many, so I'm trying to think in my head what would probably be the most, in terms of accessible. I mean, I can't really say what would be the most accessible. I think it'd be, because every culture is different from, Western, this sort of what. Okay, maybe I'd say most accessible, maybe Eastern culture, like Eastern European culture, maybe. If Western centric, you don't really like that, then sure, Eastern. But I mean, any culture is fascinating. Any cultural history is fascinating, and it really, for me, it changes by the week, and that's kind of why it helps with these YouTube videos. Is I'm constantly fascinated by a different part of the world, depending on my mood, depending on what I've read, depending on what I've, I just think about. So I think definitely the most fascinating, not the most fascinating, but the areas of history that I really find fascinating are, I'd say, pre-colonial Native American history, most importantly, like North American Native American history, like Cahokia, and the Iroquois Confederacy and the Beaver Wars and stuff like that. Just the fact that before the United States and before colonization and stuff like that, North America was just thriving with various completely different cultures that all warred and had complex politics, just as any civilization in the old world. And them essentially dealing with an alien invasion story, one that's very well documented, and we know their perspective. And it happens. That's a fascinating aspect. I always say I'm saying fascinating for some reason. That's one that I find very interesting. One channel I would actually recommend getting into that brand or not brand, that topic is Aton Shea Films. He talks about a lot of pre-colonial history in North America and stuff like that. So definitely recommend him. I think samurai era Japan, I find very fascinating. China, ancient China, like three kingdoms China, I find fascinating because it's essentially the closest humanity's ever got to 40K. It's levels of destruction and warfare that I I don't even think modern people would even like comprehend. Like, more people died in World War II, but you didn't have like literally millions of people just slugging it out on the battlefield like you did in like ancient China. So that's one I find I really like. A lot of Islamic history during the Crusades is pretty interesting. Especially Islamic travelers. So there was one traveler, I forgot what his name was, and people are gonna hate me for forgetting his name. But he traveled to the Viking like Rus, like near Finland, and he basically spent a few months with these people, and seeing his perspective and ancient Islam's perspective on Vikings is probably one of the the coolest things in history I've ever seen. And he basically just talks about how these people are beautiful, but they're basically absolute animals, and they have like no hygiene, and they smell. And this is somebody who's used to taking like two baths a day, and the Vikings just never took baths. They had no hygiene. They had sex just anywhere they wanted. Yeah, that was and he saw like a sacrifice, like a pagan sacrifice after a chief died, where they got this girl and they basically ritually killed her, and how horrified he was by the whole thing going along with it. I find that interesting. But yeah, I'm a little bit ranting, but those three, the North American, Native Americans, Chinese, and Islamic history, that's definitely do those. You got me down a rabbit hole. You got me down a rabbit hole. These are two.
I second the Iroquois pre USA era is pretty good. And the nice thing there is that you can understand a lot of where it's going if you have the Western history knowledge. So that helps put things into context a little more easily. Lightning round. You got two here. Fascination for speculative fiction. Where did that start for you?
Ooh,
this is from Charles Kahn,
so,
by the way.
This is going to sound like the dumbest answer, but Command & Conquer Red Alert. I was like 10 when I first first played it, and the idea that the Russians or whatever could have won this sort of thing, and it had like blimps, and it had Tesla coils, and it had everything. That was kind of what implanted the idea of speculative fiction and alternate history and stuff. I don't think I really started getting into that until high school, though. It was when it was kind of understanding history more, and I think what also came out? Fallout came out. Fallout was kind of a more of a speculative fiction, and also ironically, that alternate history show that was the first time I ever heard the name, the term alternate history, was that terrible Spike TV show. And yeah,
look at what it did.
I mean, yeah, I even say in the video, it was an abomination of a pilot, but it inspired me to not want to be that. And then my early videos absolutely sucked, so I wasn't better than I guess I didn't prove them wrong. But yeah, no, speculative fiction, that's definitely what got me into speculative fiction, was Red Alert. So play it 1 through 3.
Well, the last question here is there a topic that you will not touch, that you just won't ever cover on the channel?
You know what? There's a lot. There are a lot of this is gonna end. We need one more question after this because there's a little bit of a downer one. But I would say probably the one I would absolutely never talk about ever is what if okay, so there's actually a few. I'm getting lightning round. First, what if the Holocaust what if the Holocaust never happened? You know, like what if the genocide didn't happen?
That's a valid scenario.
I mean, it's
Right.
yes, it's a valid scenario, but it's also one. It's talking about it's a very controversial topic, and it's just it's kind of just super depressing. That's one of the topics that are like just super depressing. I don't joke about even.
Sure.
What else?
I can see it would be hard to make that entertaining.
A lot of
to just exploring the serious side.
I mean, it's but I think what else? A lot of the religion ones I don't talk about. Like I think early on I did a video about like what if Christianity never existed and stuff like that. But that just invites.
How'd that go?
Not good. Yeah, exactly. It's stupid. I think there's a. Yeah, it's mostly. I think it's mostly when it comes to genocides and stuff like that. I definitely don't touch. But most of the time, it's just what's ever as long as it's tasteful. That's the main thing. So if it's not tasteful, I don't really talk about it.
All right. Well, then let's not end on
let's not,
a genocide
let's
note.
Not end on that note.
Let's end on something incredibly stupid that I did write down, but we didn't get to. But since we're going to end on something stupid, let's end on the trailer for the new Chip and Dale movie.
Oh, yes.
Because I saw you tweeting about this, and then I watched the trailer for this Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers film that's coming out. And my brain slid out of my ear. It took me a long time to stuff like some brain matter back in through my ear. Some went up my nose, and I have like some of it left within my actual cranium.
Oh,
but what in God's name is this mixed media, meta, self-aware, a movie about a movie?
Yeah.
What is this?
We should have talked about this instead of history for like 2 hours. Now you got me really started. Oh no, but I'm fascinated. I love this. I don't know. It looks so. It feels like a fake movie. It feels like something.
Yes.
That would have been a shitpost in 2010. This feels like the equivalent of like the Angry Birds live action movie. The serious like Pokemon. I remember there's a serious Pokemon video. And it's all the reboots, and it's like the gritty reboots. This feels like that. Chip and Dale, but there's like an FBI SWAT thing going on. They like break down a door. The fact that they don't fully commit to 2D animation, and they're both in one's like cell shaded 3D, and it just looks
half of the trailer is just commentary on animation.
It's a movie.
I'm like, is this a movie?
I think.
What is this movie about? Making fun of other animation? I don't get it.
I think it's a movie that was inspired by the sort of the world of Roger Rabbit, because they literally show Roger Rabbit in the trailer. But it also doesn't want to exist. So it's kind of like, it's like if Alvin and the Chipmunks almost had like it was self-aware, because I have a feeling that maybe with this movie, they were like, let's make a live action Chip and Dale movie. And, they're like, let's get Lonely Island and whatever to make it. And Lonely Island is just making fun of the concept that this movie kind of exists. Because have you seen what the plot is? Who they're stopping?
Is there a plot?
Yeah, there is.
Is there a plot?
There is. Chip and Dale have to get out of retirement to combat the worst fiend of all, video piracy. That's the plot.
What?
Yeah, they're fight.
Is that
That's
really
the plot?
the
They're combating video piracy, and is commenting on how it doesn't even want to exist. Because everything's a 3D animation, a 3D reboot. So I like the rate my room someone just posted. But it doesn't look good, but it looks interesting. It looks like Roger Rabbit sold out. That's what it looks like. Because the song they had in the trailer did not match. Did not match what they were.
Nothing makes any sense. The voices don't make sense.
I'm fine with the voice.
Half of the jokes seem to be just about making fun of CG versus 2D, but versus old CG and new CG, and like the Cats movie that came out a couple years ago. Like, what is happening?
I appreciate the Beowulf joke. I liked Seth Rogen as a background character in Beowulf. That's pretty funny. I mean, it's kind of, if you think of it like it's Roger Rabbit, you know, and this seems like it's a world where cartoons live alongside humans. It's kind of saying that if that world still existed, then it's like just new forms of animation are just like made. Like there's like an anime girl in the crowd, and there was and it just had a bunch of different like animation that's kind of progressed since the times of Roger Rabbit and the original 2D cell animation. And it's like, it's weird. It's just odd. I don't know. Like, it kind of feels like if they, I don't know. This movie could work. It looks weird, but it could. I'm gonna defend it. I'm gonna actually defend it. It looks odd,
right,
but
I respect
it could work.
I respect that greatly. Yeah. Well, look, if anybody hasn't seen the trailer for Chippendale's Rescue Rangers, please like wrap gauze around your head, like over your ears as tightly as possible to prevent brain leakage. You know, do that first, then watch it. And then when you're done with that, go watch Alternate History Hub on YouTube. Watch Pointless Hub on YouTube. If you're interested in, if you don't like history, watch Alternate History Hub, because it turns out it's actually very interesting when you have a great storyteller telling the stories of humanity, and also the stories of humanity that could have been. So definitely check out that channel. You know, this was our second attempt at this, and I think we knocked it out of the park. So I just want to thank you so much for giving it a second go. It
went very well. Thank you guys for having me on a second time. I was a little worried with the audio stuff that I was like, oh, they're never gonna have me on again. I thought I blew my chance, but this went incredibly well. I hate that we ended off on Chippendale. That's forever associated with this podcast. Is the Chip? That's right. But you know what?
That's right. That's what you get for defending it.
It's true. You know,
that's your channel now.
I'm gonna live by it. I got it. I got to defend it now. It better not suck. The stakes have never been higher. So no. But anyway, thank you guys for having me on.
Just plant that flag. Plant that flag on the moon. And we'll be back next week, next Tuesday. Thanks again for coming on. Check out Alternate History Hub. If you want to be part of TCU and their TCU universe, just go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown. Until then, we'll see you, Space Cowboys.
Thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. We make this show with the support of our patrons. 100% goes directly to keeping episodes going every week, and we've been shocked by all the new support this year. The world's ending and I'm late for work. Gib Tom, Sid Poke, Demetrius, Atrocious Guff. You guys really do make this show happen. Thank you to the Tots and Dumpster crew, old and new, who save tiny little lives every month. And thank you to our grizzled, battle-hardened child infantry. Jen Mefasanti, Kevin Menard, Mikhail Steinke, Risebread, Sean Malone, Ryan, Kamikaze, Maria, Marco Sheep, Tom Videogre, Jelksies, and Dan the Latch. And a tremendous shout out to our elite baby gang commanders, Linus and Trevstead, Boromir, Bot Dogs, Chinchilla, Isaac, Conrad, James, Andrew, Jeff Davis, Patrick Pister, Basewade, Monahim, Dojangles, and Zero. You really are the elite. Thank you as well to our indentured servants, producer-editor Ben Webster, Discord Savior Latterman, and producer emeritus Dan Yoshua. And thanks to Baseweight for the use of Created in the Unknown for the opening theme, and to Electro Voice for giving us mics to sound good on top of it. The Create Unknown is an Unknown Media production in partnership with Studio 71.